Thank you. to be here in person today so we could make a proper fuss over her on her 90th. Since fate has deprived us of that opportunity, we are doing the next best thing possible. You just heard what not many people have heard, Krishna Bose's singing voice. She was singing a bhajan, Aju Rajani Hame, by Vidyapati. The clip you heard was recorded in 1978, 42 years ago. The most important person in Krishna Bose's life until she was 25 years old, and the biggest influence on her formation was her father, Charuchandra Chaudhuri, who featured in some of the photographs you just saw. Charuchandra Chaudhuri, or Dadua as we called him, exemplified what it means to be erudite. He was also the only one of my 4 grandparents whom I knew in person. I was 18 when he passed away in 1987, and he made a tremendous difference to my growing up years. মা বিশ্বাস করতেন, মার ধারণা ছিল যে if her fate had been in the hands of her mother, the adorable Chaya Devi Chaudhurani, তাহলে হয়তো মার 16 বছর বয়সে ম্যাট্রিক পাশ করার পরেই বিয়ে হয়ে যেত. She would have been married off and probably to the first party to express an interest. But Dadua, Charuchandra Chaudhuri, resolutely vetoed that. And he was insistent that she not only complete her formal education, but become, as he called it, accomplished, more than just formally educated. মা তার হারানো ঠিকানা বইটিতে লিখেছেন যে দাদুয়া মার বাবার ধনুর্ভঙ্গপণ ছিল যে একমাত্র মেয়েকে, she was the only child of her parents, কে accomplished করবেন. And one of the range of accomplishments she mastered was training in classical Indian music. She became a Sangeet Bisharad from the Bhatkhande Music College in Lucknow. যখন বললাম range of accomplishments, সত্যিই কিন্তু তাই. She was also around the same time a very good shooter. Shooter মানে এই shooter. She used to specialize in the .22 bore long rifle. It is, incidentally, Charuchandra Chaudhuri's 125th year of birth. Dadua turned 125 2.5 months ago on 10th October 2020. After her marriage and her move from Rashbihari Avenue to the Woodman Park house on the next street from here, Dadua was, in a manner of speaking, displaced as the most important person in Mamma's life by her husband, Dr. Shishir Kumar Bose. And so it remained for the next 65 years, of which they spent 45 years together. মা বাবার সম্পর্কটা কীরকম ছিল একটু বলি খুব সংক্ষিপ্তভাবে। বিয়ের পর ডিসেম্বর 1955-এ বিয়ের পর বাবা মাকে সর্বপ্রথম চিঠি লিখেছিলেন সম্ভবত 1956 সালের কোনো সময়। বাবা কোনো কাজে ট্রেনে করে দিল্লি গেছিলেন, সেইখান থেকে মাকে চিঠি লিখলেন। নাতিদীর্ঘ চিঠির শেষে বাবা মাকে লিখলেন, এটা আর কি এমন জার্নি, এর চেয়ে অনেক বড় জার্নি বাকি রয়েছে, সেই বিষয়ে তুমি লিখবে, আমি পাশে থাকব মাত্র। কথাটা যে কিভাবে ফলে যাবে তা হয়তো বিধাতাই তখন জানতেন। শুধু গবেষণা আর লেখালেখির কাজই নয়, আপনারা সকলেই জানেন যে সেটা অবশ্য অনেক পরের কথা। মা বেশ দাপিয়ে 1 দশক ধরে রাজনীতি করেছেন, 3 বার লোকসভা সাংসদ হয়েছিলেন, নির্বাচিত হয়েছিলেন সাবেক যাদবপুর কেন্দ্র থেকে, এবং তখনও বাবা কিন্তু অসীম আনন্দে মার পার্শ্বচর হয়ে রয়ে গেলেন, পাশে রইলেন মাত্র। It is Dr. Krishna Bose's birth centenary. He was born on 2nd February 1920, and the centenary year of his birth ends in a few weeks' time on the 2nd of February 2021. আপনাদের বেশিরভাগের সঙ্গেই কৃষ্ণা বসুর গদ্যের খুব পরিচয় আছে নিশ্চয়ই, আপনারা সেটা আর বেশি করে বলতে হবে না। সেই অনবদ্য flowing, readable style. All of us know Krishna Bose as a writer of prose, not just for her flowing, readable style, but also for the deep and incisive insights into a variety of subjects and themes that only a combination of a razor-sharp intellect and a true gift for writing can achieve. তবে আপনারা হয়তো সকলে জানেন না, যেমন অনেকেই হয়তো জানেন না যে মা কত ভালো গাইতে পারতেন। আপনারা অনেকেই হয়তো অবহিত নন যে মা very occasionally she wrote poetry as well. খুব মাঝে সাঝে গদ্য ছাড়াও পদ্য লিখতেন। সেরকম একটি পদ্য আমি আপনাদের পড়ে শোনাচ্ছি। এটি অন্তর্ভুক্ত হয়েছে মার একটা রচনা সংগ্রহ বেরোবে, এখানেই বেরোবে আগামী 23শে জানুয়ারি সকালের অনুষ্ঠানে। কৃষ্ণা বসু রচনা সংগ্রহ 1951 থেকে 2020, a collection of over 100 of her articles and essays published between 1951 and 2020. আনন্দ পাবলিশার্স এটি বার করছেন। মা মাতৃভাষা বাংলাতেই বেশি লিখতেন, সেজন্যে বাংলাতেই রচনা সংগ্রহটি বেরোবে। 550 পাতার বই, it's a volume of 550 pages of her collected writings over 70 years, articles and essays. But I have also translated, I am the compiler and editor of the volume, I've also translated a small number of her English articles, and they are being reproduced in this Bengali volume. The volume includes 3 of her poems. She was a very occasional poet, and the other 2 poems are published, but this one is unpublished. I found it during the lockdown period, March to May, while going through her personal papers, handwritten in a number of drafts, and I picked the most polished draft. This poem was written sometime in the early 1960s. কবিতাটির টাইটেল হল সৃষ্টির অপব্যয়। রাত না পোহাতে কলেজে ছুটেছি দুরন্ত জীবিকার তাগাদায়। স্বপ্নের ঘোর তখনও কাটেনি, স্বপ্নে দেখা দিয়েছিলেন কামরাজ। মন্ত্রিত্ব নিয়ে সে কি সাধাসাধি, নেব কি নেব না পড়েছি বিষম ভাবনায়। ঘড়িটা বেজে উঠল কর্কশ স্বরে, মন্ত্রিত্ব আর নেওয়া হলো না। যেমন ভাগ্য, স্বপ্নে একটু মন্ত্রিত্বের আস্বাদ, তাও জুটল না। সোজা প্রবেশ করতে হলো জটিল প্রশ্নে। রাজকুমার হ্যামলেট কি সত্যি পাগল ছিলেন, না ভান করেছিলেন পাগলামির? কলেজের ঘণ্টা বেজে যায় 1, 2, 3। হ্যামলেটের পাগলামির প্রসঙ্গ অসমাপ্ত থেকে যায়। প্রফেসর্স কমন রুমে কড়া গরম চা, ছুটে যায় তন্দ্রার শেষ রেশটুকু। সিঁড়ি ভেঙে ওঠা নামা 17 আর 27 নম্বর ঘরে। বেলা বেড়ে যায়, রোদ ওঠে তেতে, মেজাজ চড়ে যায় ততোধিক। প্রি ইউনিভার্সিটির মেয়েগুলো পালিয়েছে লাস্ট পিরিয়ডে। মনটা প্রসন্ন হয়ে ওঠে, ব্যাগ আর ছাতা নিয়ে পথে নেমে পড়ি। 8B বাস। ড্রাইভার হাঁক দেয় আকুল কণ্ঠে, আর উঠবেন না, এ তো বস্তা নয়, এ যে মানুষ। কান দেয় না কেউ তার কথায়। জানলার ধারে সিট ছেড়ে দেয় কালো মতো লাজুক চেহারার মেয়েটি। ছাত্রী হবে বোধহয়। কি আশ্চর্য! জানলার বাইরে চেয়ে দেখি আকাশ প্রসন্ন নীল, সাদা লঘু মেঘ লেগে আছে তার গায়ে। পৃথিবী এত সুন্দর, হা ঈশ্বর! মুহূর্তে ভুলে যাই 125 টাকা মাইনের অধ্যাপক আমি। বিধাতার সৃষ্টির আর এক অপব্যয়। 125 টাকার মাইনেটা কিন্তু তখন সংসারের প্রধান অবলম্বন ছিল, কারণ পরবর্তীকালের বিখ্যাত শিশু চিকিৎসক ডক্টর শিশির বসুর প্র্যাকটিস তখনও তেমনভাবে জমে ওঠেনি। মা একটা বাক্যবন্ধ বা শব্দবন্ধ টার্ন অফ ফ্রেজ ইউজ করতেন। এখানে ধন্যবাদ অচল, বা এক্ষেত্রে ধন্যবাদ অচল। তাই গায়ত্রীদিকে ফর্মালি থ্যাংক ইউ বলার প্রশ্ন ওঠে না। But when I first thought last March or April who might give the inaugural Krishna Bose lecture at Netaji Bhavan, I immediately thought of Gayatri Di. She was the first and the last person who came to my mind. And I strongly suspect that Mamma would agree. তাই গায়ত্রী দি, আপনি এই অদ্ভুত সময়ে আপনার এবং আমারও কলাম্বিয়া ইউনিভার্সিটি থেকে চলে এসেছেন। আমি নিশ্চিত মা খুব খুশি হয়েছেন। Before Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak delivers the inaugural Krishna Bose lecture, 2020, we have a very brief ceremony. মার একটা আবক্ষ মূর্তি বসানো হয়েছে নেতাজি ভবনের ঐতিহাসিক ড্রাইভওয়েতে। আপনারা তো সকলেই দেখেছেন। এই বছরের 2রা ফেব্রুয়ারি বাবার একটি আবক্ষ মূর্তি বসানো হয়েছিল বাবার শতবর্ষ উপলক্ষে। Father's Shishir Bose's bust is modeled on a photograph of him when he was 25 years old, when he had just been released from a year in captivity in some of the worst prisons of British imperialism. Mamma's bust is modeled on a photograph which was taken when she was almost 80 years old. Incidentally, when we observed Baba's, that is Shishir Bose's birth centenary, on the 2nd of February 2020 in this very Netaji pavilion, that was Mamma's last appearance at a public program. That was how fate decreed it. However, the same sculptor, a young man, has created both the bust of Shishir Bose, which was inaugurated by Krishna Bose on 2nd February 2020, and Krishna Bose's bronze bust, which we have formally inaugurated today. So I would like to ask the sculptor as well as the metal caster, both of whom I believe are present here today, to come up on the stage just very briefly and receive a memento of appreciation for their work from Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak. Kamal, হ্যাঁ এসো। বীরেন আছে না চলে গেছে? হ্যাঁ বীরেন আসুন। হ্যাঁ ওই বাংলাটা প্রথমে। This is Kamal Mondol. He lives in a village in the South 24 Parganas district, and we are presenting him with 3 of Krishna Bose's Bengali books, seminal books on Netaji, Itihasher Sandhane, Choronorekha Tabo, and Proshongo Subhash Chandra. And this is Biren Shaw. He is a master metal caster. Birendra Ram, I'm sorry. Biren Ashun. And he lives in the North 24 Parganas district, where he has a very interesting casting workshop. Biren, namaskar. Birenke dewa holo, Biren has been presented with Hindi books, the Hindi translation of a Netaji biography by Shishir Bose, and the Hindi translation of Krishna Bose's book called Emilie and Shubhash. Okay.
Friends, it is a great honor for us to have Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, University Professor in the Humanities at Columbia University, and the most creative literary and cultural critic of our times, deliver the inaugural Krishna Bos lecture. Today's speaker and the person in whose honor this lecture is named were both bred in the best traditions of the intellectual, cultural, and political milieu of mid-20th century Bengal. It is at this very spot that Netaji's friend and Gayatri's close relative, Dilip Kumar Roy, used to enthrall audiences in the 1960s and 1970s with his songs and speeches. Gayatri went to school in this neighborhood. She trained in music at the same institute as Krishna Bose, studied at Presidency College before going to the United States for her doctoral studies in literature at Cornell University. This audience will be familiar with her many path-breaking books and essays, especially her classic translation and interpretation of Jacques Derrida's On Grammatology. Her critical works on literature have ranged from her first book on W.B. Yeats to her study of Ramprashad's songs of devotion to Kali. It was her scholarly intervention that reinvigorated subaltern historiography and took it in new directions. Her philosophical works have included a critique of post-colonial reason. Her public service is directed towards building and running schools for children struggling in poverty and obscurity in rural Bengal. She will be traveling to Birbhum to see them the day after tomorrow. In 1977, Moitrey Devi visited China, evoking memories of Tagore, and in 1979, Krishna Bose traveled through Japan and Southeast Asia, retracing Netaji's footprints. Moitrey Devi's Ochena Chin and Krishna Bose's Charanurekhatabo can be productively read in light of Gayatri Spivak's Other Asias, in which she speaks of an effort that must be renewed again and again, with no guarantees, in the name of Asia's pluralized, where the naming names no real place. She urges us to think of a more than merely economically diversified Pan-Asianism, a more than merely comparative Asianism. Speaking of Asia, Gayatri Spivak was awarded the Kyoto Prize for the Arts and Philosophy in 2012 for being a critical theorist and educator speaking for the humanities against intellectual colonialism in relation to the globalized world. Unfortunately, our minds have been so oriented since colonial times in a longitudinal direction towards Europe that Kolkata and Bengal did not fully appreciate what a high honor this was from the eastern extremity of our own continent. In the 21st century, the Kyoto Prize is arguably the more prestigious award than, by now, the more run-of-the-mill Nobel. As a difficult year during which we suffered profound losses, including for me and for many of us a deeply personal one, as such a difficult year draws to a close, we are most grateful to Gayatri Di for coming to Krishna Bose's 90th birthday, with what I'm sure will be a precious gift for all those who love history and literature, and I might add, music as well. Let us now hear Gayatri Di on Krishna Di celebrating Krishna Bose. Gayatri Spivak.
Well, the honor is mine. Sugato, thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction. My real delight is that you took the trouble to read Other Asias carefully. That book has hardly been noticed, but I do believe that my own commitment to my thinking is reflected in that book more perhaps than in any other. I really couldn't think of not coming when Sugato asked me, and Shumantro also added his voice. I respected Krishna Di and loved her deeply, and as I was saying, I came to see her whenever I came to Calcutta. And I will also say that with my own Tara Didi, Tara Chatterjee, the philosopher, and Krishna Bose, Krishna Di, the speculative philosophical politician interested in social justice in a very broad way, our conversations were always indeed intellectual. And not just intellectual, obviously, full of fun, full of lots of gossip, but also intellectual. So I've tried to write in that conversational way rather than give a conventional memorial, and I hope I won't bore you. It's really to her I'm speaking. And as I said again, it is indeed a great honor to be asked to open this lecture series to celebrate Professor Krishna Bose on her 90th birthday. Mike's picking me up, right? You can hear me. I want to start on a personal note because for many years, as I have just said, Krishna Di was among the very few people that I took good care to visit whenever I came to Calcutta, because I felt a particular connection with her, apart from my admiration for her public achievements. This connection centered around our professor Taraknath Sen. In her book, Itihasher Sandhane, In Search of History, she writes about Taraknath Sen, Amader Mastermashai, সুপণ্ডিত অধ্যাপক তারকনাথ সেনের দৃঢ় অথচ শান্ত ব্যক্তিত্ব ছিল আর ছিল নিরভিমান পাণ্ডিত্য. Our teacher, Professor Taraknath Sen, had a firm yet calm personality and a disinterested wisdom. Such a teacher's students have an ineffable kinship of spirit, and we were no exception to this rule. We spoke frequently of Presidency College as it was then, and the importance of our early literary training. I have often said that the training into literary studies opens the imagination towards ethics because it teaches us, if we have professors such as Professor Sen, to suspend ourselves and go into the text on its own terms. Suspend ourselves. This is the bottom line of ethical practice, going into the other on its own terms. It is in this confidence that I teach my students and she taught hers. And Professor Krishna Bose was a teacher of English for 40 years at City College, becoming head of department and finally the principal of the college. If ever there is an example that literary work opens up for a practical interest in social justice, Krishna Bose is proof. Indeed, I felt proud to discover that she had written a very strong critique of the university in 1951, just after graduating, as indeed had I included a passage of a very strong critique in 1960 in my editorial in the Presidency College magazine, after which, being advised that I had perhaps lost my chance of a first class in my MA, I borrowed money on a life mortgage and left India without telling my mother, not for Britain, where I would have had to take a second BA, but for the United States. And I was very interested in seeing that, that young men from her family also went to the United States because of an anti-imperialist feeling. Another bit of resonance that I discover, and indeed this paper is about resonances, dhoni pratidhoni, tar moddhe ebong amar sange. Another bit of resonance that I find is in her review article, Sri Sharoda Devi, A Reasonable Solution of an Astonishing Life. In my own William James lecture at the Harvard Divinity School in 2008, I proposed an imaginative de-transcendentalizing reading of the powerful life of Sharoda Muni Chattopadhyay. Before I left New York a week ago, I told the executive director of the Modern Language Association and my colleagues at English and at Comparative Literature at Columbia about Krishna Bose. As Shugata was saying, she should be very much better known by English colleagues because of the connection between the literary study and a genuine interest in social justice, which goes toward political activism. So I spoke in some detail about her as an example of the scope and range of imaginative activism in the real world, nurtured by literary education and pedagogy. It is examples such as hers that allow us to fight for the humanities in the contemporary world, which has lost its turn toward the ethical because of its interest in speed and efficiency alone and a misplaced digital idealism. In my country of residence and my country of citizenship, the United States and India, we are suffering from this loss, and therefore, apart from all else, I feel the need to celebrate such persons as Krishna Bose, few and far between in a global context today. Sumantra has suggested that she is, above all, a writer. I too have concentrated upon Krishna Bose as a writer and chosen, as I mentioned, to celebrate her in terms of our resonances. This is more the style of a conversation than a memorial, and I hope you will indulge the form. Let me begin with the hardest for me. Krishnadi's book, Ishwarer Sandhane, In Search of the Divine. Just 8 months before her death, she admits that she has not been able to free herself from the influence of her atheist rationalist father. But yet, I have insisted in my own case that the transcendental is, to follow Kant's remarks to John Locke, that for which one cannot find legal proof, but without which one cannot access experience. It is not to be confused with the supernatural, but without the intuition of transcendentality, with no guarantees, we can neither mourn nor judge. I have also argued that belief is the least interesting part of the functioning of our mental instrument, ontological commitment, belief. The working of the transcendental should be constantly de-transcendentalized or de-supernaturalized by the imagination, kalpana shakti, jukti o kalpana shakti. Bangla ekta choto boi beriyeche amar ei argument tai kore. Therefore, I can think of what is called religion from within as poetry. My life has been dedicated to poetry, and I certainly do not believe in it. I think there can be some braiding between what I have just said and what Krishnadi speaks of in her book in terms of her coming to this questioning through Mahakabya, epic poetry, and children's theatre, Narugopal. Many of the people that she cites in her book are also known to me, and I will give you a narrative about one of the people she speaks of that I have heard at third hand. Make of it what you like. Professor Bose speaks of Bharat Maharaj, the Ramakrishna Mission monk Abhayananda, who, in my childhood, was assigned the task of keeping track that every visitor at Belur had eaten before he could himself eat. Apparently, as a young man, he was assigned to the Mayavati ashram in the Himalayas, a deeply forested area. Someone asked him 20 years ago, Maharaj, kono alaukik obhiggata hoyeche apnar? Have you had any supernatural experiences? Apparently, in the Mayavati ashram, he would often walk in the forest. One day he faced a tiger and was tremendously afraid. Then he spoke to himself, Tumi na sadhu? Tomar mrityu hoy? Are you not a sadhu and you're afraid of death? On the instant, a huge branch cracked and crashed from a tree. The tiger moved off. Bharat Maharaj's remark, take it as natural or supernatural. Choice is yours. It resembles Krishna Bose's father's remark. অতএব এই প্রশ্নের জবাব তুমি যখন বড় হবে তখন তোমাকে নিজেই খুঁজে নিতে হবে. Therefore, the answer to this question you'll have to find out for yourself when you're grown up. In Krishna Bose's answer, we find the words, কেমন যেন দোলা চলে রয়ে গেলাম. I seem to have remained in a peculiar double bind. Dolachal. What a perfect word, much better than dutana. What a perfect word for double bind. My phrase for the goal of my contemplative life. It has been for a long time. Gregory Bateson, the theorist of the double bind, who knew both affect and diagnostic psychology, writes as follows, I quote, statistics and book learning are useful, but in the field of action, we must also not only remember that all science is an attempt to cover with explanatory devices and thereby to obscure the vast darkness of the subject. The subject is not just subject matter, but also the I, subject. I am a Europeanist, and here I am helped by the Austrian philosopher Edmund Husserl, his thinking of Sinn or sense, by which a thing is evident through a noema, available as someone knowing something. I am sure there is a comparable idea in Indic thinking. It is my contention that if a thought is correct, many would have thought it. Material circumstances make it possible for one person to claim it memorably in public and in history. Thought does not have a national copyright. Incidentally, when I was thinking about this and I was looking at her book, I saw that Krishnadi almost immediately cited my Montumama, my mother's first cousin Dilip Kumar Roy, whom Sugato has mentioned. Would you like to, there's slide one, as her Pujonyo Dadaji, a nearly untranslatable phrase that I will put here as my respected brother. It should be a brother rather than a great uncle, but you can take your choice, and show you a photo of him sitting in our garden with my mother's hand in his hand, that's my mother, young, just so that I can resonate with her corporeally, as it were. It's about 1935. Therefore, my resonance with Krishnadi's search for the divine can be expressed by my own need for the word, quote, sacred, to describe the other directedness of the practice of the humanities beyond the discipline, which I sense most significantly in teaching, textural, and in a focused form. And Krishna Bose, in her much grander political involvement, a structural and broad engagement, structure, not texture, structural and broad engagement that has had an altogether broader influence. She was, of course, also involved with textual work. I'm talking about emphasis. In closing this section then, this consideration, the hardest one, I am an atheist myself, the hardest one to come into confrontation with the intuition of the transcendental. In closing this section, I cite myself in 2012. This is part of my acceptance speech for the Kyoto. My parents were involved with the early Ramakrishna movement and its revolution in the institutional thinking of all sectarianism, of class, race, and religion, today largely forgotten because an in-depth training of children is no longer practiced. Like the rest of the rising world, we have lost the desire for preparing the muscles of the mind for ethical reflexes. These sentiments have become somewhat exacerbated by the mission's involvement with politics these days, and here I think I would stand together with Krishna Bose in her own ability to speak truth to power and to raise integrity above the political, the merely political, though I cannot hope to match her here. She took much greater risks. Her institutional literary training enhanced a training within the family, a training in disinterested intellectual labor, often in the interest of others, not just oneself. Krishna Ghosh was born into a family which we identify with the very end, the last throes, of a movement that is often called the Bengal Renaissance. Like many others, I'm not particularly fond of that phrase. But, once again, if there is an example of a woman, specifically a woman, reflecting the great virtues of that flowering of talent among a certain class, the description is our Krishnadi. She was married into a family that also came out of that period, although somewhat, as she herself says, in decline right at that moment, and it is that family's understanding of social change for social justice that she followed as an independent scholar, thinker, and activist in her subsequent life. She was certainly and utterly devoted to her husband's Rangakaku, Subhash Chandra Bose. In the opening pages of Charan Rekhatabo, Your Footprints, she makes clear their obsession, she uses the word batik, with touching every spot visited by him. Yet, I will say, in spite of her absolute engagement with and pride in the history, geography, and individuality of Subhash Chandra Bose, her spirit was such that social change for social justice was the keynote of the Tanpura je bole na, oirokom keynote, was the keynote of this engagement, and research, publishing, and political activism its instrument. She was a member of parliament for 8 years of her life, and I believe that these years were themselves an example of her intervention in national justice as they related to earlier movements where she was an adolescent spectator. She was involved also, as you know, in many, many philanthropic activities, among them the welfare of children in as impressive a way as was her custom. Let us now touch on her work outside of teaching and politics. Among these fields is history first, of course, and then autobiography, socio-political analysis, philosophical speculation, educational theory, and more. I cannot improve upon the exquisite introduction written by Sumantra Bose to the Rachana Sangraha he has prepared for his mother's 90th birthday, which he described. Much of the uncollected writings I still have to read. Most of the books I have read, and indeed one she signed for me. I'll focus on that one, Harano Thikana. I have read her travelogues, always astute analyses of the locals in the place, earning their trust with their different social formations. For this experienced traveler in search of history, Amar Antoto Samoyik Bhabe Sriti Shatta Bhavishyat Shabi Akakar. It's a description of her historical Shandhan. Amar Antoto Samoyik Bhabe Sriti Shatta Bhavishyat Shabi Akakar. At least temporarily, memory, being, future are all mixed up for me. The word akakar, one shape, has that imaginative quality of the literary that I mentioned, to enter the past and the future as if the present of being, as if the existential present, the vanishing present. I live outside India and cannot follow Bengali publications regularly. I look forward to reading Krishna Bose's poetry in the coming months, hear her voice again in a new pitch. I wish I could tell you a story about my Panchta Tuition Kara, 1959 chale, but this is not my story, it is hers, another time. Gender is mingled with everything for her, as it is for me. Reproductive heteronormativity holds the whole world together. All our gender practices begin after this. I was brought up by proto-feminist parents. I would hesitate to apply an adjective to her parents, whom I have not studied carefully enough, but it seems clear that as the only child, as Sumantra mentioned, she was brought up as an intelligent human being rather than something only called a woman. Her self-engendering is impeccable because it is implicit, hardly ever declared in any way. Its strongest declaration is her absolute friendship with her husband, of which there are records everywhere. If I have learned anything from my own inconsequential work in gendering, it is the acknowledgement of absolute heterogeneity, learning to listen rather than demanding parity with the world I live in. When I see Krishnadi emerging out of family theatre around Narugopal Krishna, sweet ball clutching Krishna, I'm not quite sure how I would translate it. In this audience, you know what that means. Walking fearlessly in the historical sphere right from the 50s, writing so passionately about Nirbhaya, even as she goes forward to acknowledge Auntie Emilie and her daughter as members of the family. I begin to realize the broad scope of her work and understanding of gender equality, not just focused in one way, checking off a toolkit. It is also my conviction that in order for the feminist world to exist, we must devote our time carefully to the rearrangement of male desire. Her extraordinary relationship to her two sons and indeed her broad work for men and women alike produces a resonance for me as well. She writes not only for Nirbhaya, but also for Rohit Vemula. And then there are the extraordinary women whose considerable personalities she acknowledges one by one, even Chaya Devi Chaudhurani, Shumantro, Vibhavati Devi. I wish again that I could go into a long digression about the meaning of marriage without social security. But we'll go there someday. Vibhavati Devi, her mother, Chaya Devi Chaudhurani, Konoklata Devi, Bashanti Devi, the wife of Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das. My only difference here is that I am doubtful about ideological maternalism or matrivad. Although I certainly see why she was obliged to explain Subhash Chandra Bose's conviction in Itihasher Sandhane, I have had the impertinence to be critical of that conviction itself in my own Chintar Durdasha as an acceptable individual, local, or even national descriptive. আমাদের আরাধ্য যা কিছু আমরা তাহা মাতৃমূর্তি রূপে কল্পনা করেছি. We have imagined as a maternal image whatever was deemed worthy of worship by us. Here again my writing on Sharada Devi, Keu Karu Noy Ma, that goes toward her critique of an imposed maternalism, which she certainly was not institutionally educated enough to just simply reject. Although most of what she wrote was presented in a strong autobiographical voice, her three generic autobiographies are Ek Nombor Bari, Harano ঠিকানা, and Parliamentir Ondor Mahale. One Woodburn Park, 1997, Lost Addresses, a Memoir of India, 1934 to 1955, 2013 and 2015, the translation, An Outsider in Politics, 2008, 2015. I will concentrate on Harano ঠিকানা, for she gave me that book herself and wrote my name in it. The subtitle of W.E.B. Du Bois's Dusk of Dawn is, I quote, an essay toward an autobiography of a race concept. Autobiography of a concept, a peculiar idea. The subtitle of Lost Addresses, a memoir of India, is in the same genre. I believe it is there only in the English translation by Sumanta Bose, but did the translator in this case get the spirit of the text? I believe the subtitle in the original Bengali, Kolkata, 1930-1955, hits the mark better. For Krishna Bose's autobiographies, I mean, it's true that if you say India, you catch more people. But sometimes our task is to open something that's getting lost, and that's where we are in Calcutta today. For Krishna Bose's autobiographies are in the grand tradition of autobiographies. The protagonist takes herself to be a representative figure, and even from the memory of the earthquake, Bhumikampo, at the age of 3, with which it opens the book, Krishna Bose managed to offer us the unique character of East Bengal Bhadralok Kolkata, with connections intact, holding up the end of the Bengal Renaissance that I have already mentioned. This is not, quote, India, unquote, though it can accommodate India and a world. She knows this, and I quote, একজন ব্যক্তির জীবন কথা, এই বইতে উনি লিখেছেন, বা কোনো একটি পরিবারের সাধারণ সুখ দুঃখের কাহিনীর মধ্যে লুকিয়ে থাকে তার দেশকাল বা সামাজিক পারিপার্শ্বিকের কথা। লিখতে গিয়ে দেখছি কলকাতা শহর একটি মূল স্রোতের মতো বয়ে যাচ্ছে আমার শৈশব, কৈশোর আর তারুণ্যের দিনগুলির মধ্যে। An account of the space-time or of the social environment lies hidden in the story of a person's life or the narrative of the commonplace joys and sorrows of a particular family. I discover, as I write, that Calcutta city flows like a main current through the days of my childhood, adolescence, and youth. There are counterparts of the Calcutta model I propose with their specific uniquenesses all over India. But this peculiar localizations we must invite today's readers to understand in their imagination, rather than monolithic national identities like the World Bank or the Human Rights Index. Is that a Human Development Index? Sorry. There are counterparts of the Calcutta model I propose with their specific uniquenesses all over India. We will see a bit of it when we come to Vivan Sundaram. The details of personal involvement with the independence struggle undoubtedly concerns India as a whole, but it is also particularly Calcutta in this case. Indeed, Quit India is big in the first part of the book. That was the year she started reading news. She was only 12. And that was the year I was born. I was never allowed to forget it. All my childhood we sang without knowing what it was. Calcutta, 1942, October, all through our childhood. It is only recently that I found out, at Shankar Ghosh's instigation and with Anirban Bhattacharya's help, that 1942-এর 4 অক্টোবর কলকাতার ধর্মতলায় ফাসিস্ট বিরোধী লেখক ও শিল্পী সংঘের একটি সম্মেলন হয়, যার আহ্বায়ক ও সম্পাদক ছিলেন বিষ্ণু দে ও সুভাষ মুখোপাধ্যায়। সভাপতি শ্রীযুক্ত সত্যেন্দ্রনাথ মজুমদার বলেছেন, যারাই গণতন্ত্রের সমর্থক তারাই ফাসিস্ট বিরোধী হইতে বাধ্য। এই বার্তা নিয়ে সংঘের এই আন্দোলনে গণসম্মেলনে তিনি উপস্থিত হন কলকাতার বিশিষ্ট লেখক ও শিল্পবৃন্দদের নিয়ে, যাঁদের মধ্যে শ্রীযুক্ত তারাশঙ্কর বন্দ্যোপাধ্যায়, নীরেন্দ্রনাথ রায়, হীরেন্দ্রনাথ মুখোপাধ্যায়, বুদ্ধদেব বসু, ভারতভূষণ অগ্রওয়াল, আব্দুল কাদের, আবুল হোসেন, শান্তি দেবী, অরুণ মিত্র, স্বর্ণকমল ভট্টাচার্য, দেবীপ্রসাদ চট্টোপাধ্যায়, চিন্মোহন সেহানবিশ, বিজন ভট্টাচার্য, দিলীপ রায়, হিরণ কুমার সান্যাল, আবু রুস্ত, আইনুল হক খাঁ ও সুজাতা মুখোপাধ্যায় প্রকৃতির নাম উল্লেখযোগ্য। On October 4th at Dharamtala, there was a meeting of the Association of Anti-Fascist Writers and Artists, whose convener and moderator were Bishnude and Subhash Mukhopadhyay. The chair was Sri Satyendranath Majumdar. I quote, "Whoever endorses democracy must be against fascism." With this message, a group of eminent Calcutta writers and artists came to be present at this meeting. Among them, names of people such as Sri Tarashankar Bandyopadhyay, Nirendranath Rai, Hirendranath Mukhopadhyay, Buddhadev Bose, Bharat Bhushan Agrawal, Abdul Kadir, Abdul Hussain, Shanti Devi, Arun Mitra, Swarnokamal Bhattacharya, Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay, Chinmohan Sehanobish, Bijon Bhattacharya, Dilip Roy, Hiran Kumar Sannal, Abu Rust, Ainul Haq Khan, and Sujata Mukhopadhyay are to be mentioned. These are people interested in the independence of India, certainly. In opposition to international fascism, also certainly. But the focus is Calcutta, just as certainly. So, Calcutta 1942 October, for me, as the adolescent Krishna Bose starts reading newspapers, she writes of evacuation, the Japanese bombing, for fear of Japanese bombing. They go to Mihijam. My mother, pregnant with me, refused to leave Calcutta to go to Madhupur, which is more or less, now it was, these were then in Bihar, a place then in Bihar, quite comparable. Mihijam, Madhupur, Bangali Bhadralokder jar jayga, change. Ma bollen ami oikhane prosav korte jacchi na. Therefore, I was born in Calcutta. Here then are meta-psychological crossings, resonances that can hardly be called resonances, just a kind of space-time Venn diagram of two lives, one of which is here to celebrate the other. I want to say more about the appropriateness of the subtitle of the Bengali original of Lost Addresses. I want to take us for a moment out of Krishnadi's book, away from 1942 to 1946, the general strike in the Royal Indian Navy. In 1965, not yet, in 1965, Utpal Datta wrote a play about it called Kollol, Water Tumult, though the play may have been translated as Sound of the Wave. Hemangu Vishwas of the IPTA composed a song, so did Shalil Chaudhary, but Hemangu Vishwas also did, in the Marathi Poada style, because of course it's Bombay, because the strike took place in Bombay. Here he sings it. It mentions, not yet, now listen carefully because it will be in the song, and this is the point I'm making. It mentions the Arabian Sea, Bombay Harbor, a ship called Khyber, and Singapore, Shardul, Singapore. But notice the gusto with which Calcutta, the metropolis, Mahanagar, Kolkata, is celebrated. It illustrates the point I'm making. Calcutta celebrates and touches India and the world as it acknowledges itself as focus. This is the address, Tikana, connected somehow with that misnomer, the Renaissance, that we have lost. Ei Tikana amader hariye giyeche Kolkatar, and are about to lose even more massively. So this is the moment not to put a synonym India on us, but to look at this. এখন যদি গানটা বাজাও একটু, হেমাঙ্গু বিশ্বাসের কণ্ঠে গাওয়া 3 মিনিট চলবে, কিছু মনে করবেন না, কেন পুরোটা শুনলে বোঝা যায় আমি our address, the metropolis, connected with the world and with the greater India, with sympathy. Remember that meeting in Dharamtala in October 1942, the year Krishna Bose started reading news. Writers, intellectuals, and artists had called the meeting, and that group still respects the spirit of Calcutta, sometimes even as they go global or speak from their locality. Let me play you the very same song, Purotana Kichuta, the very same song from Vivan Sundaram's Meanings of Failed Action, also memorializing the Royal Navy strike of 1946, made in 2018. Ashish Radhadhyaksha, Ashish Radhadhyaksha actually got hold of the spool tape of an original theatrical production of Utpal Datta's Kollol in 1965. What I played was sung much later by Hemangu Vishwas. So we are getting a much more authentic version of the song, but none of the celebration of Mahanagar Kolkata, the at-homeness of Calcutta that I'm describing, traveling out from a working address, is easily appropriated by others. It is not Bengali chauvinism, which creates division. And this is what we have to recapture. This is what we have to recapture. We are losing it fast. And this is the address we have lost, are losing, Harano Tikana. Listen now to the same song, cropped and embedded, iterated, itorikrito, same cognate, iterated in a Mumbaikar documentary. Okay, let's go with slides 3, 4, 5, and then stop on 6, which is the song. This is the local news about the, not local actually, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad writing about the news, and then slide 4. Okay, this is the, I think this one will play, no? This is, I think if you click on the corner, this will play. I hope so.
Wireless office also. So we sent the message
Bangali,
to all the
strike
we are going on
documentary.
strike. The word strike was not known in the name. Fighting forces. We are going on strike. You will not hear from us anymore. We're closing down. And that message went to Whitehall, that is London, all the wireless stations all over British Empire. And the message we said clearly that you all Indian wireless stations must go on strike. Going on strike and we are closing down now. So in half an hour's time, whole British Empire went silent.
Okay, now slide 5.
And determined men tried to harness this force to the cause of the country's freedom. I was one of them. By dawn, the Talwar was a shambles. The parade ground was littered with burnt flags and bunting. Brooms and buckets were prominently displayed. Political slogans in foot-high letters were staring from every wall. Quit India, down with the imperialists. Revolt now, kill the British. Taking advantage of waning lights of the Indian dusk, Jai Hind and Quit India were painted on the platform from which the C&C was to take the salute. The effect on the ratings was sensational. We could not withdraw after this performance.
So Radhadhyaksha actually got this from a performance of Kollol. So this is the real thing. And right there it is. So you see what the point I'm trying to make. And artists are still holding on to this. Now, before I enter the final movement of my remarks, I want to bring myself back to a peculiar personal resonance, the connection of this group to East Bengal. Early on, she had expressed rather a conventional judgment in a kind of self-mockery, theory kореchi, a conventional judgment that we still share in secret. Some of you in the audience will know this. We're a little embarrassed about this. But, okay, I quote, বড় হয়ে আমি এ ব্যাপারে কৃষ্ণাদি লিখছেন একটা নিজস্ব থিওরি দাঁড় করিয়েছিলাম। আমার মনে হতো পূর্ব বাংলার মেয়েরা তুলনায় অধিক উদার সামাজিক ব্যবস্থায় বড় হয়েছেন। এপার বাংলার মেয়েরা গোঁড়ামি ও রক্ষণশীলতায় বন্দী, ঘটি বাঙালের ঝগড়া, কিছু করবার নেই। So she writes, when I grew up, I formed a theory of my own about this. I think that women of East Bengal had grown up by a comparatively more tolerant social system. Women this side were prisoners of bigotry and conservatism. Formed a theory, একটা theory তৈরি করেছিলাম. This is tongue-in-cheek. She is laughing at herself a bit, as would I. But it's like Polish jokes in France. But the next passage is serious. She is visiting East Bengal in the early 40s, herself in her early teens, I think, yes, after the death of her, perhaps not yet, after the death of her grandfather, the zamindar of the area. As she says clearly, she's analyzing now, later. Sritite ache, she writes. Okay, Naranganj থেকে যখন ট্রেনে উঠলাম, স্মৃতিতে আছে স্টেশনের প্ল্যাটফর্মে শোকার্ত মানুষ। দিদিমাকে জানালার ধারে বসানো হলো, তারা দিদিমাকে দেখতে চায়। মা বললেন এরা দাদুর প্রজা। পরে ব্যাপারটা আমাকে ভাবিয়েছে। পূর্ব বাংলা শাসন করতেন হিন্দু জমিদার শ্রেণী, দরিদ্র মুসলমান প্রজা শোষিত অত্যাচারিত হয়েছেন। সেখান থেকেই তো দেশভাগের বীজ বপন হলো। পাঠ্য বইতে এই অর্থনৈতিক বৈষম্য আর অত্যাচারের কথা পড়েছি। তবে দিদিমার জন্য এই দরিদ্র প্রজারা শোক প্রকাশ করছিল কেন? আমাদের কর্তা চলে গেলেন বলে তারা চোখের জল ফেলছিল। দাদু কি ব্যতিক্রমী জমিদার ছিলেন? তিনি একজন স্বদেশপ্রেমিক, সমাজ সংস্কারক, বিরাট মাপের মানুষ ছিলেন। কিন্তু মার কাছে শুনেছি দরিদ্র প্রজা খাজনা দিতে না পারলে নায়েব গোমস্তারা অত্যাচার করতো, এটাও সত্য। So we got off at Narayanganj near Dhaka and boarded a train. From the train compartment, I could see the station's platform overflowing with people who had come to meet us. Many were crying. Grandmother was asked to sit next to the window because they especially wanted to have a glimpse of her. I was a bit confused by the hubbub. Then mother told me they are your dadu's projas, tenants in the English sense. The Hindu latifundis class, zamindars, ruled East Bengal. Poor Muslim tenants were exploited and oppressed. That indeed is where the seeds of partition were sown. We'd read about this economic inequality and about this oppression in textbooks. Then why were these poor tenants expressing grief for my granny? They were weeping as they said, our master is gone. Was grandfather an exceptional zamindar? He was a patriotic, magnanimous, social reformist type of man. But mother said that it was also true that if the poor tenants could not pay the ground rent as regular tax in cash or kind, then the managing administrators, Shumantra uses the word official, I've modified the translation of it, then the managing administrators, naibs or gomostas, did torture them. Yet on the next page, Krishnadi writes, Obosho, and note this Obosho, Obosho আমাদের কলকাতার বাড়িও পূর্ব বাংলারই যেন এক টুকরো ছিল। মা বাবা, কাকারা, মামারা সবাই বাড়িতে কথা বলতেন বাঙাল ভাষায়, অর্থাৎ পূর্ব বাংলার চলিত ডায়ালগ। But of course, our house in Calcutta was also, and as if, a fragment of East Bengal. My parents and my uncles on both sides spoke in the Bengal tongue at home, in the common East Bengali dialogue, that is. You know, again, I wish I could tell you a story about how I secured a really important activist way of managing money simply by saying without thinking, and I'm not going to translate this one, Adai koile dadai buze, or purai koile gadhai buze. I said this, and the person who heard me understood who was speaking, and wham, the deal was done. Okay? This is not a translatable story. Anyway, so a peculiar variety of resonance in discord must be declared here. Harish Chandra Chakravorty, you want to put his picture. Harish Chandra Chakravorty, my father's father, this is he, born in 1863, Shaptatirtha, with a degree in 7 different philosophical disciplines in Sanskrit learning, but fully illiterate in English, was an administrator or naib for the musician zamindar of Gauripur in Mymensingh, in whose house you encountered Vilayat Khan, Inayat Khan, their father, Ustad Alauddin Khan, musicians of great repute. My grandfather did the dirty work that kept the music going. About her, so there is a certain kind of peculiar resonance here. About her political life, Krishnadi said herself, I quote, "From my life in politics, I have learned the importance of rising above narrow party affiliations and interests and thinking in broader terms of the people and the nation. That not only serves the public and national interest, but is also ultimately beneficial to the prospects of political parties and their leaders. An outsider in politics, a book first published in 2008 that she wrote in English, opens with a powerful symbolic description of independence. I don't even know if it's acknowledged by the text itself, but I'm a reader. Tarak Babu trained me to read. It's a very powerful symbolic description. I quote, "My memories of that day are literally covered in dust." Krishnadi's outsider in politics has been for me outside in. What for her is, quote, politics, the vast and influential field of structural influence, as I've said, is for me the teaching machine, the textural instrument of electoral education, gone today, at the top and bottom, Columbia and Birbhum, but for both of us, and for many, many decades, but for both of us, in our different ways, it means acknowledgement of complicity being folded together so that our practice is stronger. Returning home on a train full of violence, she writes, I could never forget that post-independence, I had been relieved to see the face of a British soldier. And when you acknowledge this, your practice is stronger. This I will say 100% from my own experience. Here there's no difficulty at all. As for myself, resonating with complicity, this is the last bit that I'll read, and I hope you will excuse my quoting somewhat at length from myself. Complicity. As for myself, resonating with complicity, I have written as follows. In the late 80s, after 2 miasmatic marriages lasting 21 years, I was able once again to pick up on the activist side of my work. Just before this, through a classed metropolitan identity crisis and a rediscovery of colonialism from a left US position, this happens. People go to the United States, and the United States left is a joke. It's a tamasha, except for the Democratic Socialists, that's another thing. But somehow they go to the US and they become leftists. It's a story. Mine too. So just before this, through a classed metropolitan identity crisis and a rediscovery of colonialism from a left US position, I had written such somewhat one-sided finger-pointing works as 3 women's texts and a critique of imperialism and Can the Subaltern Speak. That period came to an end with a book called In Other Worlds. And now, with institutional work and activist work coming together, I realized that in the current conjuncture, left and right were bound together. They were complicit, folded together. Since then, I am no longer able to practice anything without acknowledging complicity. From the period of that change came a collection called Outside in the Teaching Machine, which gives me more or less all my position, my entire position today, which one can describe as outside in the funding machine. I'm asking ourselves to learn, because now even the distinction between the public and the private sphere is shaking. So the top-down philanthropy is not the answer. Today, I'm asking ourselves to learn the consequence of being in the funding machine, socially responsible, sustainabilizing, etc., globalized capital, gaining fiscal advantages by top-down philanthropy, practicing corporatism. although we ourselves are outside in politics, outside in the teaching machine. As I close, I need not remind the audience here that rising above party affiliations and thinking of the people and the nation is a lesson that the world needs to learn today. I cannot forget that in 2002, hers was the only voice intrepidly raised in protest. If you would forgive my return to an altogether personal note with which I began, bringing us back to our shared classroom, I'm reminding myself that in our English honors syllabus, which was pretty much the same, she graduated 51, I 59, myself, that in our English honors syllabus, we had that fine 19th century liberal essay prescribed, Mischiefs of the Party Spirit, by Thomas Henry Huxley. Enough said. Among the women Krishnadi mentions, a prominent place is taken by her neighbor Radharani Devi and her husband, Narendra Dev. It was my great good fortune to present an inaugural lecture for the series celebrating her achievements, Radharani Devi's achievements, on July 15th. On that occasion, I spoke of inauguration as, in its Latin roots, containing augur, reference to a call on the transcendental, what we must assume yet cannot legally prove. I have spoken of this in my discussion of Ishare Sandhane. I said there that we cannot mourn or judge without the intuition of the transcendental. Krishnadi was a supremely secular person. I also want to say on this occasion, without developing it, that you cannot imagine and broach persistently a robust, non-Euro-specific secularism without that intuition of the transcendental. Religion cannot be a private matter like going to the bathroom, that's Europe. Krishnadi we have to confront that problem. Krishnadi was a supremely secular person, but I must leave this as a cliffhanger on this occasion, hoping to pick it up in a response to Talal Asad to be completed in January. Here I will simply add that you also cannot inaugurate, if you take the word seriously, without the intuition of the transcendental. I therefore cut the ribbon with the golden scissors, inaugurate the Krishna Bose Memorial Lecture Series, literally invoking the infinite, her favorite poem, literally invoking the infinite in the finite, the irrational algebra of all human hope. This is a satisfying conclusion, but I must have my customary coda about the Rohingyas. I promised them that whenever I spoke in public, I would speak of them. As you are surely aware, the government of Myanmar has been systematically persecuting its Rohingya population for several decades with increasing violence, to the extent that the United Nations and the International Criminal Court have accused the country's leadership of crimes against humanity and genocide. Indeed, the UN has been implementing emergency efforts to relieve the catastrophic humanitarian crisis in neighboring states as the Rohingya have been forced out of Myanmar. This crisis threatens to intensify dramatically following Bangladesh's recent determination to forcibly transfer refugees to the remote and dubiously habitable island of Bhasanchar. Indeed, India and China have refused them any shelter. The Philippines and Thailand have been sending them back to nowhere. US sanctions against Myanmar's military leadership were enacted by the US government in 2018 and expanded in 2019. Official US policy, however, encourages, quote, responsible investment in the country and avoidance of engagements with its military. John Frederick Packer, one of our fellow workers in the Free Rohingya Coalition, writes in the interminable email exchanges that go back and forth, I quote, "The legal case in terms of state responsibility is fairly straightforward, a matter of breaches of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, adopted by Resolution 263A of the UN General Assembly on December 9, 1948, entry into force 12 January 1951. A plain reading of the ordinary words of the provisions of the Convention, assessed against the known facts, establishes a prima facie case, the obfuscations, non-cooperation, etc., on the part of the government of Myanmar justifies a reasoned negative inference in terms of their responsibility, since the events have taken place in the territory and with regard to persons within their effective control. Yet, and this is my point, even if the law is passed, this is why I was talking about texture, even if the law is passed, minds will not change among the Rohingyas as among their killers and their top-down helpers. It is just that there is law, but law is not justice, which is why the humanities. Minds don't change. We are not yet ready to think of them in an old history before Burma. In fact, the Rohingyas were there before there was nation state. Their name was not Rohingya. In a changeful historical geography, we are not yet ready to think of them in an old history, in a changeful historical geography, as citizens of a named space, as agents of the paradox of democracy. Subhash Chandra Bose knew this area as well as he knew Japan. They are the limit of my agency. I stop here, asking you to think about it at least. Think that imaginative activism for epistemic change, change in how we know, my rule of thumb for education at Columbia as in Birhum is not yet available there, for they have no place to call their own. And to find a place is simply a stage for the staging of the critique by their mindfulness brought to birth, failing again and again, which is the work of education that we practice, failing by us first. But who are we and how many? That's what the Calcutta Thikana also asks. Who are we today to get that move going? What should you do about the Rohingyas? Here in India, it's for you to decide. Reclaim your lost address, your Harano Thikana. Thank you.
I'm sure you will agree with me that there could not have been a better tribute to Krishna Bose on her 90th birthday. Let me show you 3 photographs of Gayatri and our mother together. This is at Durga Puja in 2013. Both have just finished, I think, a sumptuous lunch on Ashtami Day, and here they are together. This is in 2014, when Gayatri delivered the Netaji oration at this venue. And finally, this is Gayatri with our mother on the 30th of April of 2016 in her room. I should explain that our mother had suffered a stroke in March of 2016. Shumantra was here. He took her to hospital. I came rushing back from the United States. Our mother absolutely hated that machine in which you're put for an MRI. I know that because she refused such an examination in Boston. When I arrived, she was coming out of the MRI center, and she simply said to me, a second MRI. And then I went to see her during visiting hours in the afternoon. She had suffered a temporary paralysis of her left side, but she was writing an article with her right hand. The last decade of her life was truly her finest. She overcame all manner of physical challenges with her absolute mental strength. When I was a child, the first song that I learned from her was Ma achen ar ami achi bhabna ki ar ache amar ami mayer hate khai pori ma niyechen amar bhar bhabna ki ache amar. I was very fortunate that for 63 years of my life I could spend with this feeling of bhabna ki ache amar. Gayatri Di has just delivered an absolutely scintillating inaugural lecture in 3 movements. And as she has put it, she has talked about the resonances between her and her Krishna Di. These are not agreements. These are truly more intimate than agreements. These are resonances of growing up in a milieu of their work as teachers and writers. And since she has spoken with great insight about several of our mother's books, including Harano Thikana, where she has really placed the importance of Calcutta in relation to the rest of the country and the world, and also Ishware Sandhane. Let me just tell you how important Gayatri Di's insight is about the complex relationship between secularism and faith. As she has put it, Krishna Bose was a supreme secularist. But you cannot be a supreme secularist, as Gayatri Di has argued today, in a non-European context, and to be specific, a South Asian context, without having an intuition of the transcendental. I wish I could play for Gayatri Di what I think would have been our mother's applause for her. She was, of course, a singer, but as you saw in some of the pictures, she played the sitar. And she played her favorite raga Jaya Jayanti brilliantly. And I think it's a pity that we never recorded her playing the sitar, but I'm sure that my mother would have played Jaya Jayanti for Gayatri Di after this, wonderful achievement in the form of this inaugural lecture for her Krishna Di. I would like to thank all of you for being here with us. And I know since this has been live streamed on YouTube, there have been friends after this in North America, in Europe, in all over India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Japan, who have listened to Gayatri Spivak today. And given what we have just said about the relationship between secularism and the intuition of the transcendental, we will conclude this evening by playing for you Krishna Bose's recitation of a very famous Tagore poem, which you will, of course, immediately recognize.
আমার একটা চিরদিনের ভালো লাগার কবিতা আছে। আমার মনে হয় অনেকের কাছে এই কবিতাটি আমার মতোই চিরদিনের প্রিয়। কবির একটা জিজ্ঞাসা আছে ঈশ্বরের কাছে, আমাদেরও কিন্তু আছে সেই একই জিজ্ঞাসা। এখন মনের কথা আমরা তো গুছিয়ে বলতে পারি না, কবি আমাদের হয়ে খুব সুন্দর করে সেই জিজ্ঞাসাটা তুলে ধরছেন কবিতার মধ্যে দিয়ে। মনে হয় কবি এই জিজ্ঞাসার যথার্থ উত্তর নিজেও বোধহয় খুঁজে পাননি, আর আমরা তো আজও সেই উত্তর খুঁজে মরছি। প্রশ্ন: ভগবান, তুমি যুগে যুগে দূত পাঠায়েছ বারে বারে দয়াহীন সংসারে। তারা বলে গেল ক্ষমা করো সবে, বলে গেল ভালোবাসো, অন্তর হতে বিদ্বেষ বিষ নাশো। বরণেও তারা, স্মরণেও তারা, তবুও বাহির দ্বারে আজি দুর্দিনে ফিরানো তাদের ব্যর্থ নমস্কারে। আমি যে দেখেছি গোপন হিংসা কপট রাত্রি ছায়ে হেনেছে নিঃসহায়। আমি যে দেখেছি প্রতিকারহীন শক্তের অপরাধে বিচারের বাণী নীরবে নিভৃতে কাঁদে। আমি যে দেখিনু তরুণ বালক উন্মাদ হয়ে ছুটে কি যন্ত্রণায় মরেছে পাথরে নিষ্ফল মাথা কুটে। কণ্ঠ আমার রুদ্ধ আজিকে বাঁশি সঙ্গীত হারা, অমাবস্যার কারা লুপ্ত করেছে আমার ভুবন দুঃস্বপনের তলে। তাই তো তোমায় সুধাই অশ্রু জলে, যাহারা তোমার বিষাইছে বায়ু নিভাইছে তব আলো। তুমি কি তাদের ক্ষমা করিয়াছ? তুমি কি বেসেছ ভালো? Query. My God, age after age, time and time again, you have designed to send your messengers upon this lovely earth. They have preached, forgive them all. They have said, give them your love, root out the poison of hate from your heart. Worthy of homage they are, worthy of remembrance they are. Yet, on this evil day, with thankless salutation, from the outer door I have turned them away. Because I have seen the weak stricken by treacherous hatred under deceitful cover of night. Because I have seen the voice of justice weep in silence and aside for the strong's unremedied crime. Because I have seen tender youths in frenzy strike their heads against stone and go to death in vain. Stifled is my voice today, my flute has lost its song, and my world swallowed up in a nightmare by the dark night's prison. My God, oh my God, I ask you in tears, those that are poisoning your air, those that are putting out your light, have you given them your love? Have you forgiven them all?